Hello everybody, my name is Raxef and welcome back to today's video. I'm super excited to be posting this right now because as you might see, it is my first video in quite a long time. I took a bit of a hiatus there, but now I am back better than ever and I cannot wait to get into all of the juicy goodness that Battle for Azeroth has to offer. So today's video, as you can probably tell from the title, is going to cover the raid testing on the final boss in Uldir, which is G'huun. Now this won't be a beginning to end soft guide that you might find elsewhere on YouTube. I'm not really attempting to do that here. If you're looking for an actual guide or recommendations on how to approach G'huun, then you might be better off looking at a channel like Final Boss TV. In today's video, I'm just purely going to cover what my experiences were and give some feedback as to how exactly this boss could be improved, where it needs to be tweaked, what needs nerfing, what needs buffing, and so on. So first off, let's talk about the room that this encounter takes place in. Now, like other encounters in Uldir, the room itself actually plays quite a large part in the fight. Basically, the way that it's set up, as you can see in the video, is that there's two tiers which are connected by a ramp, and periodically throughout the fight, some number of group of players are going to need to collect a golden orb that spawns at the beginning of the tier, and then they're going to need to carry that orb all the way to the end of the room towards where G'huun is sort of cradled in his little cave. So let's take a look at the encounter itself. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you that we did not even make it to Phase 2 whatsoever during this encounter. A lot of what I'm seeing actually on the forums is that even the most skilled raiders were having problems reaching Phase 2. On the forums, I think only one or two groups got one or two peaks at Phase 2. Everyone else was just super overwhelmed by the ads and by the tendrils that you had to keep up with, that it was just basically impossible to see Phase 2. So one of the biggest things that we had to focus on during the fight was keeping interrupts up on the cyclopean terrors, which channeled this damage over time spell called Torment. And while initially the damage wasn't that hard, if left uninterrupted, that dot would eventually kill whoever it was targeting. Now, in a group my size, as you can see, we only have 15 players, and the composition isn't optimal by any means. I mean, we only have 3 holy priests. We don't have any other kinds of healers. So we weren't even really going into this with what could be considered a decent composition. But with our 15-man team, once you accounted for some number of players going to take care of the power matrices, there really weren't enough interrupts to go around when there was the full number of ads up channeling Torment. Now, the health of the ads does scale based on how many players are in your group, but I don't really think that was the problem here. The main problem was dealing with the interrupts. Now, there could be different ways to approach this. Whether the whole raid focuses on one tendril at a time and a ranged DPS interrupts ones that aren't being focused on. In our particular run, we just had kind of chunks of people cluster around different sides of the tendrils and kind of juggle interrupts. When we have the first first pull of the ads, the ones that are kind of alongside the walls, the interrupts are generally okay, but once the second and third wave of ads spawns, it becomes much more difficult. There wasn't a ton of communication in this particular group about who was handling what interrupts and if there was a particular order. So if the number of ads or how frequently they cast Torment is not changed based upon how many players are in your raid group, having a very solid grasp of what interrupts a certain group of people have on hand and how you can deploy those most effectively, getting your interrupts in order will be a top priority. The second of the two ads that initially starts in the room is the Dark Young, and this was just its standard kind of tankable ad. It wasn't really hard to deal with. The main difficulty with this particular ad was positioning it right so that the right amount of DPS could get the buff that it grants when it hits 100 energy and it casts Dark Bargain. Some people didn't know that you can't stand in Dark Bargain twice or else you get mind controlled, so that was a little bit touch and go. We didn't really focus on that kind of positioning too much in the early portions of the raid test. We kind of focused on it a little bit more towards the end. I definitely feel that that's going to be a large part of getting down the Cyclopean terrors in a decent amount of time, so that if you don't necessarily have the interrupts available, at least you'll be able to kill the terrors in a reasonable time in order to keep healing at a steady pace and not really have people freak out about this dot that's eventually going to kill them if the ad isn't killed or interrupted. We also had to deal with an ad called the Blight Spreader Tendril. This was an ad that popped up, and it's kind of like a giant worm. Similar to the Dark Young, it's not immediately threatening. The biggest part about this ad that needs to be taken care of is that it has a cast which needs to be interrupted, or else it's going to deal raid-wide damage, and it's a decent amount of raid-wide damage. If there were, any people low and it got one cast off, those people would certainly die. If it got two casts off, then it was pretty much guaranteed to be a raid wipe. Like with the interrupts on the Cyclopean Terrors, we needed to figure out who's going to be saving their interrupts for the Blight Spreader, because oftentimes we would have the Terrors up at the same time as the Blight Spreader, and it would just be chaos because we have these dots which we need to either kill the Terrors or interrupt the Terrors, and then we have this raid-wide damage which is going to be coming out from the interruptible cast as well from the Blight Spreader. So there's a lot of interrupt juggling that's going to be happening with this fight, and if the rate of the casts isn't dependent based upon the number of players in your group, I can definitely see that larger groups, 20, 25, will have a much higher chance of success in terms of managing these ads compared to our group, which only had 15, and out of those 15, we had the 5, which were the 2 tanks, and then the 3 healers. And while they can interrupt, sometimes it's just not really their focus. It's up to the 10 DPS, some of which might not even be in the group because they might be running the power matrices over towards Gahoon. It just can become very hectic very quickly unless there's a lot of organization going on in terms of not only an interrupt order, but also interrupt assignments for ads. Now, of course, the second portion of this first phase is the upper tier, where the power matrices spawn and you need to pick up these little golden orbs, run through some stationary ads, I guess you could call them, and deliver it to a re-origination drive. Now, basically, the way that this is laid out is you pick up the orb, there's all of these ads that dot your path along the way to the drive, and they have this sort of AoE slow that spreads out. It doesn't deal any damage, but it does slow you immensely, and what you need to do is basically hit these ads so that this pool kind of shrinks into them. Now, while you're up there, there is a dot that gets put on you. It's just something that appears when you cross that threshold into the upper tier. It's not particularly harmful. It really barely did any damage to really any of us. We had a healer up there kind of keep an eye, but for the most part, we didn't even require healing. And that also had to do with the fact that we were kind of able to cheese this mechanic. The way that I sense it's supposed to be done is you pick up the power matrices, you run some amount of meters through these ads, hitting them so they don't slow you. As you hold this power matrice, it puts a dot on you, which doesn't cause you any damage, but it does slow you down, eventually rooting you. And then you need to pass that power matrice off to someone else in your raid so that they can then go another couple meters and then pass it off to someone else, and then they can deliver it. With the general rate of the debuff, you would probably need, without doing any sort of special class abilities, you would probably need 3 or 4 people to hold the power matrices. What we were just doing, since we had 2 warlocks, is we had the warlocks put a portal on either side of the room where the power matrices were spawning, and we had the warlock pick it up. We had them take it, take the portal, we got pretty much almost halfway down the path. I took the portal as well, alongside the warlock. All I pretty much did was whirlwind to clear the path, and then once they were rooted, they handed off to me, and I was able to heroic leap and deliver it. So not only did we not really need healing because we weren't up there long enough to take any significant amount of damage, but also we really only needed 2 of us, and it was me and a warlock, but this could also easily be done with monks or with mages who have their blinks. I mean, there's plenty of mobile classes that could bypass the slow mechanic, which forces you to pretty much coordinate a lot more with more members of your raid team. I don't know if this is something that Blizzard is planning on fixing, whether they're going to be limiting your movement in any way or limiting your ability to use your high mobility abilities while you're holding the orb, but it's just something to keep in mind. It's not super encounter breaking. It doesn't make really anything a lot easier, besides the fact that you only need 2 people on the upper tier, and the people who deliver the orbs can get back to the group to kill ads quicker. The upper tier just it seemed kind of more like a side chore, which we needed to do, but there wasn't really any high stakes that went along with it. So I can kind of see both sides of the argument where they might change something or they might not. I thought it was cool that we were able to use our mobility abilities to kind of bypass certain mechanics or give us an upper hand in overcoming the slows or the snares, but we're eventually just going to have to see what happens when it comes live. So that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked it, then of course, give it a thumbs up. If you have anything to say, then of course, leave it in the comment section down below. If you happen to test Cahoon, let me know your thoughts. When you tested it, did you have a larger group and you were able to handle the interrupts more fully, or did you have a smaller group like me and you were kind of struggling with the interrupts across the various ads? If you didn't test Cahoon, let me know your thoughts on what you think of the boss just by seeing some of the feedback, some of the videos that people are posting. I'd love to hear that as well. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. See you later.